in the shadow of Manhattan's growing skyline, where gaslight flickered through narrow windows and horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobblestones, a predator stalked the night with methodical precision. Between the years 1823 and 1826, 17 families in New York City simply vanished from existence, discovered days later in their beds, arranged as if peacefully sleeping in death's eternal embrace. The killer left no witnesses, took nothing of value, and murdered with such surgical precision that authorities initially refused to believe they were dealing with a single perpetrator. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What made these crimes particularly terrifying wasn't their brutality, but their intimate nature. The killer didn't break down doors or shatter windows. He entered homes like a welcomed guest, moving through families' most private spaces with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Children were found tucked carefully under blankets, parents positioned as if they had simply closed their eyes for the last time, and entire households eliminated without a single sign of struggle or disturbance. The New York Evening Post refused to print the full details of these crimes for over 2 years, fearing mass panic would grip the city. When they finally did, the revelation sent shockwaves through every neighborhood from the Battery to Harlem Heights. Tonight, we reveal the true story of Ezekiel Thorne, the man who turned family homes into silent tombs and nearly brought an entire city to its knees with fear. Before we continue with this chilling tale of America's most methodical family killer, this channel is dedicated to those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of our nation's history. If you're ready to learn what really happened in the shadows of early America, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Are you prepared to discover how one man's twisted genius nearly paralyzed New York with terror? The year 1823 marked a period of unprecedented growth for New York City. The completion of the Erie Canal had transformed the port into America's commercial gateway, drawing ambitious families from across the nation to seek their fortunes in the bustling metropolis. Neighborhoods that had been farmland just decades earlier now bustled with merchants, craftsmen, and laborers building what would become the greatest city in the New World. Greenwich Village, once a refuge from yellow fever epidemics, had evolved into a respectable residential district where successful merchants built modest but comfortable homes for their growing families. These narrow 3-story houses, packed tightly along tree-lined streets, represented the American dream made manifest middle-class families with enough prosperity to afford domestic help, enough stability to plan for their children's futures, and enough security to sleep peacefully behind unlocked doors. It was into this world of growing prosperity and social optimism that Ezekiel Thorne arrived on a crisp September morning in 1823. His appearance was unremarkable in every way that mattered for his deadly purpose as a man of medium height and build, with brown hair and forgettable features that would blend seamlessly into any crowd. His clothes were well made, but not ostentatious, suggesting a successful tradesman or clerk who had earned modest prosperity through honest work. What distinguished Thorne wasn't his appearance, but his extraordinary ability to read people and situations with predatory precision. He possessed an almost supernatural talent for understanding family dynamics, household routines, and the small vulnerabilities that every home contained. Within minutes of meeting a family, he could identify who made the decisions, who controlled the finances, and most importantly, what fears and desires drove their daily lives. Thorne introduced himself to the Greenwich Village community as a furniture maker specializing in custom bedroom furnishings for discerning families. His timing was perfect. The neighborhood's growing prosperity meant many families were upgrading their homes, and bedroom furniture was considered a symbol of middle-class respectability. He rented a small workshop on Bleecker Street and began the patient work of establishing himself as a trusted member of the community. His approach was methodical and brilliantly calculated. Rather than advertising his services broadly, Thorne relied on personal recommendations and word of mouth, referrals that would naturally bring him into intimate contact with families in their most private spaces. He would spend hours in potential clients' homes, measuring rooms, discussing design preferences, and observing family routines with the eye of someone planning far more than furniture placement. The Whitmore family became his first clients in early October 1823. Charles Whitmore, a successful dry goods merchant, had recently purchased a 3-story house on McDougal Street and wanted custom furnishings that would reflect his growing status in the community. His wife Margaret was expecting their 3rd child, and they envisioned bedroom sets that would accommodate their expanding family for years to come. Thorne spent 3 weeks working in the Whitmore home, arriving each morning with his tools and materials, sharing meals with the family, and gradually becoming a familiar presence in their daily routines. He learned that Charles left for his shop at precisely 7 each morning, that Margaret preferred to retire early during her pregnancy, and that the children Sarah, age 8, and Thomas, age 6, were sound sleepers who rarely woke during the night. More importantly, he observed the family's security habits. Like most respectable families of the era, the Whitmores locked their front door but left windows unlatched for ventilation. They kept a modest amount of cash in a desk drawer for household expenses, and Charles maintained a small collection of valuable papers in a strongbox that was never properly secured. Most crucially, Thorne discovered that the family's bedroom doors remained open at night to allow air circulation throughout the house. During his time with the Whitmores, Thorne perfected the persona that would make him so devastatingly effective. He was unfailingly polite and respectful, showing genuine interest in the family's welfare and future plans. He asked thoughtful questions about the children's education, offered helpful suggestions about household management, and demonstrated a level of craftsmanship that justified the time he spent in their home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His furniture was genuinely excellent, built with meticulous attention to detail and finished to standards that exceeded anything available from commercial workshops. The bedroom sets he created were beautiful, functional, and perfectly suited to each family's specific needs. This wasn't a man cutting corners or rushing through his work. Everything he produced was a masterpiece that would serve families for generations. The psychological dimension of Thorne's preparation was perhaps even more sophisticated than his technical skills. He studied each family member's personality, habits, and relationships with scientific precision. He learned to recognize the subtle signs of marital tension, financial stress, or family secrets that might affect a household's stability and routine. Margaret Whitmore, for instance, suffered from insomnia related to her pregnancy and often took laudanum to help her sleep. Charles had developed a habit of working late at his shop, sometimes not returning home until well after midnight. The children had been having nightmares since moving to the new house and required extra attention at bedtime. Each of these details became part of Thorne's mental blueprint of the family's vulnerabilities. By early November, Thorne had completed the Whitmore commission and moved on to his next clients, the Harrison family on Christopher Street. The pattern repeated itself with the same methodical precision. He spent weeks in their home, learning their routines, observing their habits, and building their complete trust while creating beautiful furniture that would outlast the family who commissioned it. The Harrisons were a younger couple with 2 small children, both under the age of 5. David Harrison worked as a clerk in a law office, while his wife Elizabeth managed their modest household with the help of a young Irish maid who lived in the basement. Their routine was more predictable than the Whitmores. The children were in bed by 7, Elizabeth retired by 9, and David spent an hour each evening reading in the parlor before joining his family upstairs. Thorne's observations revealed that the Harrison house had a particularly advantageous layout for his purposes. The servants' quarters were separated from the main house by a narrow courtyard, and the family bedrooms were clustered together on Panven. The second floor. The windows facing the back garden could be opened from outside without making any noise, and the staircase was solid enough to support weight without creaking. During his 3 weeks with the Harrison family, Thorne also began developing the tools and techniques that would make his crime so horrifyingly efficient. He experimented with various methods of creating copies of keys, timing the effects of different substances on sleep patterns, and perfecting his ability to move through houses without making any detectable sound. His workshop on Bleecker Street served as more than just a furniture-making facility. In the basement, hidden behind stacks of lumber and woodworking equipment, Thorne maintained a private laboratory where he studied the effects of various chemical compounds on human consciousness. He obtained materials through his network of suppliers, always ordering small quantities from different sources to avoid suspicion. The chemical research wasn't random experimentation, but systematic investigation into substances that could deepen natural sleep without leaving obvious traces. Thorne tested combinations of laudanum, chloral hydrate, and various plant-based compounds, carefully documenting their effects on animals before moving to human applications. His goal wasn't to poison his victims, but to ensure they would never wake during his visits to their homes. By December 1823, Thorne had completed commissions for 4 different families in Greenwich Village, establishing himself as one of the neighborhood's most sought-after craftsmen. His reputation was spreading through word-of-mouth recommendations, and he was receiving requests for work from families throughout Lower Manhattan. More importantly, he had accumulated detailed intelligence about dozens of households, their routines, their security measures, and their vulnerabilities. The psychological profile he developed during this period reveals a mind that was both brilliant and completely devoid of normal human empathy. Thorne didn't kill out of rage, sexual compulsion, or financial desperation. His motivation appeared to be the intellectual challenge of committing perfect crimes that demonstrated his superiority over both his victims and the authorities who would investigate his work. In his private journal, discovered years later hidden in a false bottom of his toolbox, Thorne wrote extensively about his philosophy of murder. He viewed families as complex mechanical systems that could be understood, predicted, and ultimately dismantled through careful observation and precise intervention. Each household presented a unique puzzle that required customized solutions, and the successful elimination of an entire family without detection represented the ultimate proof of his intellectual capabilities. The first murders occurred on the night of December 15, 1823, when the Whitmore family was discovered by their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had become concerned when Margaret failed to appear for their weekly market trip. The scene that greeted authorities defied immediate comprehension. The entire family, Charles, Margaret, 8-year-old Sarah, and 6-year-old Thomas, had died in their sleep, apparently without any awareness of their fate. Each family member was found in their bed, positioned naturally as if they had simply closed their eyes and never awakened. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry, and no indication that anything valuable had been stolen from the house. The front door remained locked from the inside, and all windows were secured exactly as the family would have left them before retiring for the evening. Dr. William Morse, the family physician who examined the bodies, was initially baffled by his findings. All 4 family members appeared to have died simultaneously sometime between midnight and 3 in the morning, but he could identify no obvious cause of death. There were no wounds, no signs of poisoning, and no indication of disease or natural causes that could account for the simultaneous death of an entire healthy family. The only unusual detail was a faint sweet odor that lingered in the bedrooms, reminiscent of flowers or perfume, but with an underlying chemical quality that Dr. Morse couldn't identify. The smell was strongest near the beds and seemed to dissipate quickly when windows were opened for ventilation. Several neighbors mentioned detecting a similar odor during the night, but most had dismissed it as someone burning scented candles or preparing medicines for a sick family member. Captain James Reynolds of the New York City Watch initially treated the Whitmore deaths as a tragic but natural occurrence. Simultaneous deaths of family members, while unusual, weren't unprecedented in an era when diseases could strike quickly and medical understanding was limited. The lack of any evidence suggesting foul play, combined with the family's spotless reputation and the apparent absence of any motive for murder, led him to classify the deaths as resulting from unknown natural causes. This classification would prove to be a fatal mistake that allowed Thorne to continue his work unmolested for months. The Whitmore deaths were recorded as a medical mystery rather than a criminal investigation, meaning no systematic search was conducted for evidence of an intruder. No interviews were conducted with people who had recent access to the home, and no investigation was launched into the family's recent activities or associations. The second attack came 6 weeks later, on January 28, 1824, when the Harrison family was discovered in exactly the same condition. David and Elizabeth Harrison, along with their 2 young children, were found dead in their beds with no apparent cause of death and no signs of struggle or forced entry. The same faint, sweet odor lingered in the bedrooms, and the same absence of any obvious motive or evidence of theft left authorities baffled. Dr. Morse, who was called to examine this second family, began to suspect that the deaths might not be natural occurrences. The similarities between the 2 cases were too precise to be coincidental. The positioning of the bodies, the timing of the deaths, the mysterious odor, and the complete absence of any disturbance in the homes. However, his suggestion that the deaths might be the result of some unknown form of murder was met with skepticism from both the watch and city officials. The idea that someone could kill entire families without leaving any trace of their presence seemed impossible to law enforcement officers, who were accustomed to dealing with obvious crimes involving clear evidence and obvious motives. Murder, in their experience, was a messy, chaotic affair that left obvious signs of violence and struggle. The notion of a killer who could eliminate families with surgical precision, while leaving no evidence of their presence, challenged their fundamental understanding of criminal behavior. More importantly, the lack of any apparent motive made the murders seem inexplicable. Nothing was stolen from either home, there was no evidence of sexual assault, and both families were well-regarded community members with no known enemies or debts. The crimes appeared to serve no purpose that authorities could comprehend, making them difficult to investigate using conventional methods. Thorne's selection of victims was proving to be as calculated as every other aspect of his crimes. He targeted families that represented the respectable middle-class, stable, prosperous, and well-integrated into their communities, but not wealthy enough to warrant special security measures or powerful enough to demand intensive investigations. These families lived comfortable but unremarkable lives that wouldn't generate sustained public attention when they disappeared. The psychological impact on Greenwich Village was immediate and devastating. Families who had felt completely secure in their homes began installing additional locks, hiring night watchmen, and sleeping with weapons within reach. The local carpenter who specialized in security improvements reported being overwhelmed with requests for reinforced doors and window bars. Neighbors began organizing informal patrol groups to watch each other's homes during the night hours. Children who had previously roamed freely through the neighborhood were suddenly confined to their homes after dark. Parents who had once felt comfortable leaving their children with neighbors or domestic help became suspicious of everyone outside their immediate family. The social fabric of the community began to unravel as trust eroded and fear took its place. Meanwhile, Thorne continued his work with the same methodical precision that had brought him initial success. His furniture business remained profitable and well regarded, providing perfect cover for his continued observation of potential victims. Each commission gave him legitimate access to a family's most private spaces, and his reputation as a skilled craftsman ensured a steady stream of new clients who welcomed him into their homes without suspicion. His third victims, the Caldwell family on Waverly Place, were murdered on March 12, 1824. Robert Caldwell, a successful printer, his wife Anne, and their 3 children ranging in age from 4 to 12, were discovered by their housekeeper in the same mysterious circumstances that had characterized the previous killings. The pattern was becoming undeniable, even to authorities who had initially resisted the idea of a serial killer. The Caldwell murders marked the beginning of widespread panic throughout Lower Manhattan as news of the killings began to spread beyond Greenwich Village. The Evening Post, despite their initial reluctance to publicize the crimes, found themselves competing with other papers that were beginning to report the mysterious family deaths. Public pressure for answers and protection grew with each passing day. Captain Reynolds, faced with mounting pressure from city officials and terrified citizens, finally acknowledged that the deaths were the work of a single killer. However, the complete absence of conventional evidence made investigation nearly impossible. The killer left no fingerprints, no witnesses, no physical evidence of his presence, and no clear pattern in victim selection that might help predict future attacks. The investigation into what newspapers had begun calling the family vanisher took a dramatic turn when Detective Inspector Marcus Donovan arrived from Boston in April 1824. Donovan had earned his reputation solving complex crimes that baffled local authorities, and Mayor Philip Hone personally requested his assistance as panic gripped the city. Unlike Captain Reynolds, who relied on traditional investigative methods, Donovan brought a scientific approach that would prove crucial in understanding Thorne's methodology. Donovan's first innovation was systematic documentation of every detail at each crime scene. He photographed the positioning of bodies using the newly developed daguerreotype process, measured distances between furniture and victims, and collected samples of air and fabric that might contain traces of the mysterious odor witnesses reported. His meticulous approach revealed patterns that had been invisible to previous investigators. The detective's analysis of the 3 crime scenes revealed that the killer possessed intimate knowledge of each family's routine and home layout. The victims had been approached in a specific order that minimized the chance of anyone awakening to discover the attack in progress. Children were always eliminated first, followed by the mother, with the father killed last. This sequence suggested someone who understood family psychology and the protective instincts that might cause parents to investigate unusual sounds from their children's rooms. More significantly, Donovan discovered evidence that the killer had been inside each home multiple times before the murders occurred. Minute scratches on lock mechanisms indicated someone had been experimenting with different methods of entry. Slight discoloration on certain floorboards suggested someone had tested the quietest paths through each house during daylight hours when families were away. Most telling of all, he found microscopic wood shavings near bedroom windows that matched lumber used in the home's original construction. The wood analysis led Donovan to investigate local craftsmen and tradespeople who would have legitimate reasons to enter multiple homes throughout Greenwich Village. His inquiry revealed that all 3 murdered families had recently commissioned custom furniture from the same craftsman Ezekiel Thorne of Bleecker Street. This connection, which had been overlooked by previous investigators, provided the first concrete lead in the case. Donovan's investigation of Thorne's background revealed a carefully constructed identity that began to unravel under scrutiny. The letters of recommendation Thorne had used to establish his business were authentic but referred to a different person entirely. The real Ezekiel Thorne had died of consumption in Philadelphia 2 years earlier, and someone had assumed his identity with remarkable thoroughness. Bank records showed that the false Thorne had arrived in New York with substantial funds from unknown sources. His workshop lease had been paid for 2 years in advance, and he maintained accounts at 3 different banks under slightly different versions of his assumed name. This level of financial preparation suggested someone who had been planning his New York operations for months or possibly years before arriving in the city. The detective's examination of Thorne's workshop revealed a level of sophistication that far exceeded simple furniture making. Hidden compartments contained detailed floor plans of dozens of homes throughout Manhattan, along with comprehensive notes about family routines, security measures, and behavioral patterns. A locked chest yielded an extensive collection of lock picks, skeleton keys, and specialized tools designed for silent entry into homes. Most damning of all, Donovan discovered Thorne's private laboratory in the workshop basement. The chemical apparatus found there included equipment for distilling various compounds, detailed notes about experiments with sleeping agents, and preserved specimens that analysis would later reveal to be human brain tissue. The laboratory represented years of systematic research into methods of rendering victims unconscious without leaving detectable traces. Thorne's journal, written in a complex cipher that took weeks to decode, revealed the full scope of his criminal philosophy and future plans. He viewed his murders not as random violence, but as scientific experiments designed to test various theories about human behavior, security measures, and investigative capabilities. Each family represented a different variable in his ongoing research into the perfect crime. The journal entries showed that Thorne had been studying law enforcement techniques with the same systematic approach he brought to his murders. He understood how evidence was collected, what types of clues investigators looked for, and which aspects of crime scenes received the most attention. This knowledge allowed him to eliminate or obscure evidence, while leaving false clues that would misdirect investigation efforts. His chemical research had focused on developing compounds that would mimic natural death while ensuring victims never regained consciousness. The sweet odor witnesses reported was the result of a carefully crafted mixture that combined fast-acting sedatives with substances that would dissipate quickly, leaving no trace for post-mortem examination. Thorne had spent months perfecting the dosage and delivery method to ensure consistent results. The killer's victim selection process was revealed to be far more systematic than anyone had suspected. His journal contained detailed profiles of over 40 families throughout Manhattan, each evaluated according to specific criteria that included household routine predictability, security vulnerabilities, family composition, and potential investigative complications. The 3 murdered families had been chosen not randomly, but as optimal test subjects for different aspects of his methodology. Thorne's long-term plans, as revealed in his journal, included expanding his operations to other cities along the eastern seaboard. He had already begun corresponding with furniture makers in Philadelphia, Boston, and Baltimore, apparently planning to establish similar networks of legitimate businesses that would provide cover for future killing sprees. His goal was to create a systematic approach to family murder that could be replicated in any urban environment. The psychological profile that emerged from Donovan's investigation revealed a mind of exceptional intelligence twisted toward completely malevolent purposes. Thorne possessed the analytical skills of a scientist, the practical abilities of a master craftsman, and the patience of someone willing to spend years perfecting his techniques. His crimes weren't impulsive acts of violence, but carefully planned experiments conducted with scientific precision. The manhunt for Thorne began on May 15, 1824, when Donovan obtained warrants for his arrest on charges of multiple murder. However, the killer had anticipated this development and disappeared from his workshop 3 days before authorities arrived. His escape had been planned with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized his crimes, leaving investigators with an empty building and a cold trail. The search of Thorne's abandoned workshop revealed evidence of hasty but systematic destruction of materials. His chemical laboratory had been dismantled and the equipment removed or destroyed. Documents had been burned in the workshop's forge, leaving only fragments that provided tantalizing glimpses of his broader criminal network. However, his escape had been so rapid that he was forced to abandon some crucial evidence, including his coded journal and detailed victim files. Donovan's analysis of the abandoned workshop suggested that Thorne had maintained multiple escape routes and safe houses throughout the city. False walls concealed emergency supplies, including money, weapons, and forged identity documents that would allow him to establish new identities in different cities. The level of preparation indicated someone who had always planned for the possibility of discovery and had invested considerable resources in ensuring his eventual escape. The investigation expanded beyond New York as Donovan shared his findings with law enforcement agencies throughout the Northeast. Reports began arriving of similar unsolved family murders in other cities. Dating back several years before Thorne's arrival in New York, the pattern suggested that the Greenwich Village killings were part of a much larger criminal enterprise that had been operating across multiple states. A breakthrough came when authorities in Philadelphia reported discovering a workshop similar to Thorne's New York operation, abandoned approximately 3 years earlier under circumstances that matched the New York investigation. The Philadelphia workshop contained evidence of the same chemical research and victim surveillance that characterized Thorne's New York activities, suggesting he had been perfecting his techniques for years before arriving in Manhattan. The Philadelphia evidence included correspondence with medical schools and private physicians who had unknowingly provided Thorne with information about anatomy, toxicology, and post-mortem examination procedures. His letters, written under various assumed names, requested technical information about topics directly related to his murder methods. This correspondence network extended throughout the eastern United States and into Europe, revealing the international scope of his criminal research. Meanwhile, panic continued to grip New York City as news of Thorne's escape spread throughout the community. Families who had previously felt secure in their homes now lived in constant fear that the killer might return to complete unfinished business. Hardware stores reported unprecedented demand for locks, bolts, and security devices. Private security services experienced a boom as wealthy families hired guards to protect their homes during nighttime hours. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate security concerns to fundamental changes in how families interacted with service providers and tradespeople. The revelation that a trusted craftsman had been systematically murdering his clients destroyed the social trust that urban communities required to function effectively. Parents became suspicious of anyone who sought access to their homes, regardless of their apparent credentials or reputation. Children throughout the city began experiencing nightmares and sleeping disorders as fear of the family vanisher dominated community conversations. Schools reported increased absenteeism as parents kept their children home rather than risk their safety. The normal rhythm of urban life was disrupted as an entire population struggled to cope with the knowledge that their most basic assumptions about safety and security had been shattered. Detective Donovan's investigation revealed that Thorne's network included accomplices who had provided support for his operations while remaining unaware of his true activities. A complex web of suppliers, landlords, and business associates had unknowingly facilitated his crimes by providing legitimate cover for his activities. These unwitting accomplices included respected members of the community who were devastated to learn how their assistance had been exploited. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Thorne had been studying law enforcement procedures and judicial processes with the same systematic approach he brought to his murder techniques. He possessed detailed knowledge of how evidence was collected, what legal standards were required for conviction, and which types of witnesses were considered most credible by juries. This knowledge had allowed him to structure his crimes in ways that would be extremely difficult to prosecute, even if he were captured. The manhunt intensified when reports arrived of a family murder in Albany that bore all the characteristics of Thorne's methodology. The victims were discovered in their beds without any signs of struggle or forced entry, and witnesses reported the same mysterious sweet odor that had characterized the New York killings. This development suggested that Thorne was continuing his murderous activities while moving northward toward the Canadian border. Donovan coordinated with authorities throughout New York State and New England to establish checkpoints and monitoring systems designed to intercept Thorne before he could escape to Canada or establish new operations in another city. However, the killer's systematic preparation and multiple false identities made detection extremely difficult. He possessed the resources and knowledge necessary to evade law enforcement indefinitely. The investigation took an unexpected turn when a furniture dealer in Boston reported suspicious inquiries from someone matching Thorne's description. The individual had asked detailed questions about establishing a workshop, obtaining supplies, and connecting with potential clients throughout the city. These inquiries suggested that Thorne was planning to resume his activities in a new location rather than simply fleeing to escape justice. This development led Donovan to develop a new strategy for capturing the killer. Rather than simply pursuing Thorne's trail, he began working with law enforcement agencies in major cities to identify and monitor potential workshop locations where the killer might attempt to establish new operations. This proactive approach represented a significant evolution in criminal investigation techniques and would prove crucial to preventing future murders. The network of surveillance and coordination that Donovan established became a model for interstate criminal investigation that would influence law enforcement practices for decades. His systematic approach to evidence collection, criminal profiling, and multi-jurisdictional cooperation demonstrated that complex crimes required sophisticated investigative techniques that transcended traditional local law enforcement capabilities. As autumn arrived in 1824, the investigation had expanded to include law enforcement agencies from Maine to Virginia, all working together to track a killer whose crimes had revealed fundamental weaknesses in the nation's security and investigative systems. The case had evolved from a local mystery into a national crisis that would ultimately transform how America dealt with sophisticated criminal enterprises. The hunt for Ezekiel Thorne had become more than just an attempt to capture a serial killer. It represented a test of whether American law enforcement could adapt quickly enough to confront new forms of criminal behavior that challenged every assumption about how evil operated in a civilized society. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.